Our story begins in a small village in China with a strange young man hiding his face under an umbrella, telling the guard that he wants to meet Master Zhou, and when the guard refuses, he tells him he should be scared because he is not an ordinary human and could crush him like yogurt. Then he reveals his face and tells the guard that he is the devil himself, and suddenly his eyes turn red, making the guard panic and run away screaming. And this young man clearly has supernatural power, which shows when he fixes the wooden board in front of him with just a flick of his finger. And at that moment, a girl appears wearing an oversized hat on her head. And when her friend asks why she is wearing such a big hat, she casually says she's protecting her skin from the sun. But suddenly her expression changes to a creepy one and she raises her chopsticks to attack. Yet the other girl reacts faster, breaks the chopsticks, and throws them away. And a quick but scary fight erupts between them. But the girl with the hat decides to retreat, only for the second girl to grab her hat, making her shout that the hat is the most important thing to her. Then she goes back to attack, but the other girl doesn't give her the chance, releasing a strange substance in the air that makes her dizzy until she faints. We return to Li, the young man who called himself the devil, walking confidently when he suddenly senses someone attacking him from behind, and he instantly counters using the umbrella, which turns out to be a lethal weapon so strong it sticks into the ceiling. But the attacker doesn't give up and tries again, leading to a destructive battle between them. Yet Li is overwhelmingly powerful and the attacker grows exhausted, eventually stopping his attack, and Li stares at him with a challenging look, saying no one can defeat him, as he flicks his finger and all the stones in the place begin moving while he adds his sword into the attack and strikes to finish his opponent. But the young man reacts quickly, releases a huge burst of energy and tells him he's not that easy to kill, managing to block the attack, grab the sword, and stab Li with it. At that moment, a guard arrives and orders the attacker to move away from Li, but the attacker pulls out the sword and says Li is a devil and must be killed, while Li smiles confidently and says, "Not you." And at the same time, we see the two girls who were fighting earlier now walking together like friends. And we learn the girl wearing the hat is named Yun and the other is named Xia, and Xia is brave enough to hunt monsters herself without fear, using her sharp instincts to discover that Yun is actually a monster pretending to be innocent, telling her she knows all her mischief. And Yun pretends to act cute and innocent, asking if such a face could ever cause trouble, trying to fool her. But Xia tells her not to bother because she knows every trick monsters use and she can't be fooled. Suddenly, the army captain arrives, telling Xia to hand Yun over, but Xia refuses and tells him to take her to the monster holding department instead so he can collect Yun from there. And the guard tells Xia he knows a monster saved her when she was young, and that's why she is biased toward monsters and might even set them free at any time, warning her that if she won't hand Yun over willingly, he will take Yun by force. And soldiers rush to attack. So when Xia realizes the danger, she frees Yun and tells her to run quickly, staying behind to fight the soldiers alone. But suddenly one soldier fires an arrow at Yun, making her fall to the ground, and Xia runs to her apologizing because if she hadn't arrested her earlier, none of this would have happened. But suddenly Yun evaporates into thin air and Xia becomes heartbroken. And we see the captain was right that Xia cares deeply for monsters, but only the good ones. We return to Zhou, the man who attacked Li, saying he will leave Li for now, but one day he will kill him and nothing will stop him. Yet suddenly Li steps toward the sword and asks him why wait for someday, then stabs himself and bleeds. But even while bleeding, he speaks arrogantly, telling Zhou he can't kill him, confusing Zhou as he pulls the sword out of Li's chest. And then something strange happens as Li puts his hand on his heart, releasing a red energy that heals him instantly, telling Zhou no one can kill the devil. But despite all that, Zhou manages to capture him and imprison him in a cell completely alone, trying to interrogate him to discover what he is planning. And Li tells him he wants to help him capture monsters, which shocks Zhou because he thinks Li is tricking him. But Li insists he is serious and explains that monsters are his enemies, and he is willing to cooperate under one condition. And Zhou smirks, saying he knew there must be a condition. And Li tells him he wants Xia, and she must be his partner in capturing monsters. When Zhou refuses, Li loses control, uses his power, breaks out of the cell, pins Zhou to the wall, and controls the guards to let him escape. Then he goes to Xia and gives her a flower, saying it's a gift because they get to see each other again. And we discover he is the one who killed Xia's teacher, but he was wearing a mask back then, so she didn't recognize him, and she pretends to introduce herself like it's their first meeting, then suddenly stabs him in the neck. But when she notices he isn't affected, she realizes killing him won't be easy, so she acts like it was an accident. And suddenly Li faints, and Xia drags him and informs Zhou that she knocked Li out using a special dagger. But Li suddenly wakes up saying he won't fall for their tricks again and tells them clearly he wants to work with them, and Xia agrees because she honestly has no other choice. After that, Li speaks with Zhou again and says he will teach him every fighting art and magical skill he knows, but on one condition: Zhou must kill him later, which shocks Zhou, who asks what he means. And Li explains that he must die by Zhou's hand, and that if he dies like that, the world will be free from evil, confusing Zhou even more about how an evil being wants to save the world from evil. But he stops thinking about it, swears he will kill Li after learning all the magic tricks. As he walks away, Xia appears and keeps staring at Li, remembering the body shape of the masked man she once saw, and feeling completely pretty sure it was him. So she speaks to Lee and asks if they have met before, and he tells her this is the second time she asks him that question while stepping closer and removing the hat from her head, telling her he knows her body is weak and she could die anytime, and that he is the only one who can help her regain her strength. But Zia says she is sure he is a shameless man who never does anything without taking something in return, I know. And she asks him what he wants in exchange for helping her. So he tells her he made a mistake and opened the gate between the human world and the monster world, and many monsters escaped because of him and started harming humans. And that he wants to help her capture those monsters to make up for his mistake, which makes Gia believe him, but she warns him that if he is lying, she will turn him into shawarma. And then she goes to speak with Joe, who we discover is her childhood friend, and she convinces him to accept Lee's help. And Joe finally agrees and goes with her to Lee, and they all agree to join hands until they catch every evil monster. Then we see a strong girl training with her bow while her eyes are covered, but she suddenly removes the blindfold and realizes someone attacked all her soldiers, and at that moment Zia appears, causing the girl to become alert and ask who she is and what she wants. And Sia tells her she came especially for her, and we learn the girl's name is Yue, a monster killer who uses powerful combat skills, and Sia tells her they want her to join their team, surprising Yue, who asks who they even are. And at that moment, Lee appears and makes a tiny movement with his finger that shatters all the pottery Yue was using for training, which angers her, and she prepares to leave, but she stops when Lee tells her he knows everything about her brother, and he convinces her to join in exchange for helping her find him. After that, we see a small boy talking to Sia, telling her that Joe chose him to help catch monsters, and she looks at him mockingly, telling him he needs someone to help him instead. But she is forced to accept him because she trusts Joe wouldn't pick anyone useless, and she also tells the boy that Lee is a devil, shocking the boy, who asks how that could be. So Lee grabs the boy's hand and screams in his face, terrifying him so much he faints. And when he wakes up, he keeps staring at Lee in fear. And we learn his name is Yang, a human doctor who seems useless but is actually extremely skilled. And then Gia introduces him to Yue and tells them they will be one team. At that moment, the captain, who hates Gia because she protects good monsters, arrives and wants to attack her. But Lee steps forward and stops him, telling him that his mood is bad today, and if he touches them, he will turn him and his whole army into shawarma. So the captain says, fine, whatever, and leaves with his soldiers. Afterwards, Zia gathers her new team and they enter the forest together. But Yang is so weak, he cannot handle the smell of corpses scattered around. So Yue gives him a fruit to eat and tells him to toughen up because they still have a long night ahead hunting monsters. Meanwhile, Lee discovers blood on the ground, and when he touches it, he sees what happened there, realizing a monster appeared, killed all the soldiers guarding a bride, kidnapped the bride, and escaped, telling them this monster is dangerous. So Zia says they must catch it as fast as possible. At the same time, the army captain meets a masked man and tells him he will stay on Zia's tail until he destroys her team, and the masked man replies that none of that matters to him, and the only thing he wants is Zia's head, and after she is gone, everything else will follow. Then we see Yang complaining because Lee wants him to dissect the corpse they found in the forest, even though he is a human doctor and not trained to be a forensic one, and he asks for a huge amount of food to endure the suffering. But Lee yells at him and tells him to stop whining like a child and do his job quietly, and they realize they must find the monster fast because it is probably planning more crimes. So Lee goes alone to search until he finds it underwater because it is a water monster, and he threatens it that if it doesn't come out, he will jump in and turn it into a tray of baked fish with sauce. So the monster gets scared and comes out of the water, and Lee uses his power to force it to kneel, noticing it is injured, so he gives it some medicine, telling it to use it for healing. And Lee realizes the monster pretended to be badly hurt earlier just to steal the medicine from Zia. And Lee gives it a cold look and says he will soon complete his plan, and we discover Lee is not actually against monsters as he pretends, and that he is secretly plotting something behind Zia's back. The next day, Lee is with Zia when someone named Leon appears to attack, telling Lee that if he wants to talk about the past, he should follow him, and Leon runs away, so Lee chases him. And Zia follows too, because she recognizes the weapon in Leon's hand as the same one used to kill her teacher, and suddenly her memories return, remembering seeing Leon fighting her teacher before she later found her body, and Leon looks at Lee with an evil smile and tells him he will make Zia relive her past. Then he attacks using a magical hand technique that hypnotizes Zia, making her see scenes from her painful memories, and Leon returns to his original monstrous form, telling Lee he has two choices: either run to save Joe and the others who are now in danger, or stay with Zia and save her from him. And Zia begs him to go save Joe and leave her, but Lee refuses, saying he cannot abandon her, and he is sure Joe and the others can save themselves. And Leon tells him that even if he saves her now, he will not be able to save her from him later. Then Zia steps toward Leon, calling him her sworn enemy and saying she will finish him to avenge her teacher. But Leon mocks her and says she can never defeat him because her strength has weakened, and suddenly Zia collapses. So Lee tries to give her some energy but realizes her body can't handle it. And in that moment, Zia stands up suddenly, attacks Leon, grabs Lee's hand, and runs away with him. And Lee asks her why she didn't want revenge just a minute ago and what changed, but she tells him their days are long and they can take revenge later, then keeps running. stunning. Afterwards, Lee goes to heal Joe's wounds from his last battle and uses his incredible healing ability to cure him completely. And Joe stays beside him as he recovers and then begins planning how to hunt monsters again. The next day, they all enter the forest looking for the monster. But when they arrive, they find the forest filled with strange smoke. And suddenly something strange happens. Yue finds herself alone with no one around, and she looks everywhere in confusion until she sees a young man standing behind her. And he turns out to be the monster who controls Yue and Sia's dreams. And he is shocked he couldn't make Joe lose consciousness or enter his dreams, so he instead traps Sia in her most painful memory, the death of her teacher. Meanwhile, Joe begins suspecting that Lee is responsible for everything happening and wants to kill him. But Lee tells him he is the only one who can wake Sia up, and that if Joe kills him, Sia will stay unconscious forever. So Joe is forced to keep Lee alive and takes him to Sia and Yue. And Lee performs some magical rituals that remove all the nightmares inside them, making them wake up. But Yue wakes up extremely exhausted, so Lee suggests she stay there while they continue the mission. And Sia agrees and lets Lee create a strong protective barrier around her to keep her safe until they return. Then Joe lifts his sword at Lee and tells him he saw him talking to the water monster and asks him. Lee tells him he helped the water monster, and Joe asks why. So Lee replies jokingly that the monster was a decent guy and asks why humans don't have decent people like that. And Joe tells him the truth is humans only betray each other. Then he asks Joe to step back because he still needs Lee's help, and they continue normally while warning each other to stay cautious, and they let the water monster go after making sure he isn't the evil monster they are searching for. After that, Lee speaks to Joe and asks him if he really doubted him, and Joe tells him he is not doubting but completely certain, pointing at the servant who fainted and saying that servant claimed he saw a devil with red eyes. And Joe tells Lee he is sure he was the devil that servant saw. Then Jia joins the conversation and tells Joe she saw Lee meeting the water monster. So Lee decides to confess and admits that he did meet the monster and helped him after confirming he wasn't evil, and explains that in exchange the monster allowed Zia to see scenes from her past so she could remember what happened to her teacher. So Zia starts remembering, and when she sees Lee choking someone, she asks the monster if what she saw was real, and Lee tells her everything she saw was the truth, asking her what exactly she saw, and she hesitates and tells him she saw her teacher teaching her special magic skills, hiding the part where she saw him choking. And Lee tells her there are still many things she will remember later. After the discussion, the dream monster talks to Joe and tells him he used to give humans dreams so they could escape their painful reality, and that the kidnapped bride was used in rituals that allowed him to make humans dream. And he believes he was helping them live the life they wanted, but Joe tells him his way was wrong and says he will arrest him and imprison him for 1,000 years to punish him, reminding him he also killed the soldiers while kidnapping the bride and must pay for everything. So the monster angrily asks how many 1,000 years humans think they even live and suddenly attacks. And a fierce fight breaks out, and Lee jumps in to defend Joe, so the monster decides to increase his power and strengthen his attacks, hitting Lee hard and injuring him. At that moment, Leon arrives and stares at Lee in confusion, asking when he became stupid enough to get hurt protecting humans, reminding him that humans killed his father and brother, and offering to join forces with him to take revenge, but Lee refuses. So Leon threatens Jia and says he will kill her, but then tells them he is the only one who knows where the Power Stone is, and if they kill him, they will never find it. And to make them believe him, he reveals that half of the stone is inside Zia's body, but she cannot use it because her strength is too weak to control it. And suddenly Leon attacks, so Lee quickly blocks it and believes him. And in that moment, Leon uses a magical hand technique to attack Joe without touching him, knocking him unconscious and making him fall into the river beside him. And suddenly something strange happens. Joe sees memories of his brother and then suddenly sees Lee killing his brother. And without noticing, he rises out of the river and finds himself in a different place, shocked to see Lee dragging Sia. And as soon as Zia falls, Joe panics and attacks Lee. And we discover all of this is happening inside Joe's mind, but without realizing it, he begins attacking Lee in real life. And Lee realizes Joe is not conscious and tries to wake him up. But Leon laughs and tells him not to bother because Joe won't wake up since Leon is controlling him, watching everything with joy. Leon then becomes confused when he sees Lee grab Joe's sword and stab it into his own body, not understanding why he did that. But at the same moment, Joe realizes he is inside a nightmare and sacrifices himself inside the dream to break it, and everything around him disappears, bringing him back to consciousness. And Lee understands that Joe only stabbed him so Joe could wake up, so Lee escapes before they all team up against him. That night, Lee sits with Xia near the river and talks with her, and Xia notices he sounds sad and is hiding many things about his life, and she becomes emotional when he tells her demons never cry. And suddenly Xia remembers her old memories, and we discover she once loved Lee and cried for him when he disappeared suddenly, and that when he met her again, he didn't even remember their bond, and in that moment, Lee feels weak and faints. So Xia gets shocked and takes him to Joe. Later, Lee wakes up pretending to be sick, but Joe immediately sees through him and tells Xia he is fine and only acting. So Xia understands Lee faked being weak to avoid her questions, and she angrily tells him she was stupid for believing a devil like him and storms storms out. Meanwhile, the army captain appears with evil in his eyes, saying it is time to destroy Xia and everyone with her. And as he walks toward their location, a young man suddenly appears and asks him where he thinks he's going, then attacks him and his army, flipping them over like cockroaches lying on their backs. And at that moment, Li is nearby watching everything, and suddenly the young man reveals his face, making Yang scream because he looks like a fox. And Yang keeps screaming until the young man tells him to shut up and asks if he saw a ghost. And we learn this young man is the mountain spirit who has lived for more than 2,000 years. And he speaks to Xia, introducing himself as Tian and telling her he is not evil, and explaining that his duty is to protect the mountain from evil creatures, and that many monsters entered the human world which increased the spread of evil. So the good monsters work to stop it. Suddenly, Tian pulls out vegetables and a pan to cook, saying he always travels with his dream, and Yang mocks him, asking if his dream is just vegetables. So Tian yells at him to shut up because he is getting on his nerves. And we learn his dream is to become a famous chef, and Li looks at him with a smile and says, simple dreams are the most beautiful, realizing he is a very peaceful and gentle monster, even kinder than a music teacher. So he invites him to join their team and help them catch evil monsters. Later, Xia sits with Tian and explains they only capture evil monsters, and they talk about each team member's personality, and she promises to help him achieve his dream by making him cook for them every day, which makes Tian happy and thankful, and he promises loyalty to them. After that, Zhou takes Li to an abandoned house and tells him a murder happened there, asking Li if he senses anything strange, and Li focuses carefully before saying everything feels normal. But Zhou insists something is wrong and asks Li to give him his hand, and when Li does, Zhou suddenly cuts him with a sword, making Li shout, "You sneaky traitor!" And Zhou explains he discovered Li's blood increases the power of his sword, so he wanted to add some of it, and Li stares at his hand in shock, asking who gave Zhou permission to take his blood, but Zhou ignores him and walks away, leaving Li to heal his wound while cursing at him. Meanwhile, Xia and Yue are searching the house and arguing lightly before making peace again. Unaware, a strange young man is spying on them, and he looks at Yue and says, "I missed you, my dear sister," while we switch to Yang speaking with Tian, proudly introducing himself as a doctor, better than the most famous surgeons ever, when suddenly a corpse falls on him from above, making him scream while Tian laughs at how ridiculous he looks, and Yang crawls out from under the corpse and notices strange wounds on the body. At the same time, Li finds another corpse with a mysterious tattoo on its hand and concludes the killer is a monster, not a human, so he gathers the team for a meeting. Then we return to Yue, who stares at her brother in shock, refusing to believe he is standing in front of her because she thought he was dead, and she asks if he is still killing innocent people, and he replies yes and hits her head against the table, but she dodges and attacks him, demanding to know why he came back, and he tells her she will know later, then attacks her again. But he senses Li and Zhou approaching, so he decides to escape quickly. Yet Zhou attacks him and proves far stronger, stopping him from fleeing, but Yue's brother doesn't give up and keeps fighting until he finally escapes, leaving Yue upset and full of questions. And she tells her friends she once tried to kill her brother because he used to murder innocent people, and that it was the hardest thing she ever experienced. She tells them she attacked her brother only to save people from his evil, and says she is sure he now hates her and has returned only to take revenge on her, warning them they are walking straight toward a huge disaster. After Xia comforts Yue, she goes with the rest of the team to explore the area, and they find an old-looking clock that seems ancient, and the moment they approach it, it lights up with a dazzling glow, and suddenly something strange happens. Everyone disappears except Tian, who finds Xia and Li standing beside him in a strange place filled with women performing dramatic dance shows, and they have no idea why or how they arrived there, and Li tells them they must split up to explore the place faster, choosing to stay with Xia and sending Zhou alone, while Yue finds Yang, who nervously tells her brother must be somewhere nearby. They then see Yue's brother looking weak and chained, and Yue feels pain when she sees him like that, her sisterly emotions rising as she holds his hand to free him, but suddenly the chains move from his hand to hers, locking her instead, and her brother tells her he will soon be stronger than her and take back what is his, then walks away, leaving her chained, and Yue suddenly wakes up to Yang shaking her, telling her to wake up, and she realizes everything she saw was inside her dreams, and she cries sadly because she becomes even more certain her brother now hates her. Suddenly, she sees a clock similar to the one that transported them earlier, and the moment she approaches it, she disappears, leaving Yang terrified as he finds himself alone, screaming in fear. Yue appears next in a marketplace, standing in front of warrior-shaped dolls, when a strange man appears and tells her to beware of her brother because he won't stop until he becomes stronger, and then she will be the first one he destroys, and his words make Yue's fear grow even more. The strange man tells her he is the wish monster, and reveals that he appeared to her brother and granted him his deepest wish. His wish was for her to be happy and live the rest of her life free, and the wish monster tells Yue she's a terrible sister because she tried to kill her brother while he just wanted her happiness. And Yue gets even more shaken, dropping her bow, and the wish monster mocks her weakness and says her collapse is not enough and she must pay the price for what she did, then offers to send her back into the past so she can fix her mistake, and Yue agrees. But Yang suddenly appears through the glowing clock, screaming for her not to accept, smashing the clock in front of him as he had overheard the entire conversation. Suddenly, blood drips from the broken clock and transforms into a powerful light that pulls Yang into the same place Yu is in, and he watches the wish monster holding a sand-filled clock in his hand before a bright burst of light erupts and starts sucking out the magic energy from Yue's body. The wish monster turns to attack Yang, but Yue charges at the monster, so he throws Yang aside with his power, then grabs a doll from the table and uses a strange ritual on it, and suddenly the doll transforms into Yue's brother, who looks at her and says he missed her, but the wish monster interrupts, asking how he could miss her and urges him to take revenge because she tried to kill him, pushing him to hate her and fueling his anger. Because of his manipulation, Yue's brother attacks her, and the wish monster sees that Yue is too strong and tells her that he will fight her himself and restore her brother's honor because her brother is still weak and cannot beat her. Then he attacks her with full force, but Yang jumps in front of her at the last second and takes the attack in her place. At that moment, Lee arrives with Xia and Zhou, and Lee's expression shows he recognizes the wish monster, and we learn this monster is evil and secretly works with Leon in all his wicked plans. Meanwhile, Tian is sitting in front of the clock waiting for Xia and the team to return, but the clock begins to shake violently and Tian looks at it with shock as he realizes Leon is trying to enter the clock to harm Xia and her friends, and Tian angrily tells him he will not allow anyone to hurt his friends because they are now his precious companions, and Leon smirks, telling him he brought this fate upon himself. Meanwhile, Lee continues fighting the wish monster, trying to defeat him, and the monster keeps attacking him until he suddenly freezes when he sees the mark on Xia's forehead, staring at her in confusion and mistaking her for the teacher who once trained Xia. But she tells him she is only the teacher's student. Then we learn the wish monster turns humans into dolls after granting their wishes so he can control them however he wants, and all the dolls on the table were once ordinary people. Xia reveals this truth to Yue, telling her the monster controlled her brother and forced him to kill innocent people, and Yue becomes overwhelmed with sadness, screaming for them to kill the monster, but her brother grabs an arrow and pushes the monster away, saving her. But immediately the monster shoves Yue's brother aside and escapes, leaving Yue's brother lying on the ground while she runs to him crying and apologizing, and her brother tells her he is not angry with her and that he regrets being the reason innocent people died, and he begs her to forgive him before suddenly disappearing, leaving Yue heartbroken. Lee then looks at the dolls on the table and notices one special doll that seems extremely important to the wish monster, and he realizes he can use it to his advantage, so he grabs it and calls out to the monster, warning that if he doesn't show himself immediately, he will destroy the doll. At first, the monster stays hidden, but when he sees Lee about to break it, he appears furious, screaming at Lee to return it, but Lee ignores him and threatens to snap it again, and a powerful burst of light suddenly surrounds Lee and the others, transporting them to a new location. The wish monster appears and tells Lee the doll he is holding is the only way he can bring the teacher back to life, and we learn the wish monster used to be good and help the teacher protect humans. Xia speaks to the monster, telling him he broke the promise he made with the teacher and started treating humans like toys, and he says he realized his mistake when the teacher was still alive and went to her to apologize and start over, but she refused and used her power to imprison him and punish him. And the monster continues telling them that the teacher grew weaker after using most of her strength to bind him, and he took advantage of her exhaustion and escaped, and now he regrets running away and leaving her like that without helping her. Lee tells him he will continue suffering from guilt for the rest of his life and that dying is the only way he can be free from it. And Lee admits he also wants to die to escape his own pain, but before death he must undo the evil he caused by letting demons enter the human world, and he tells the monster Leon tricked him and he should also atone for his sins, but the wish monster refuses and says he will continue working with Leon, so Lee becomes frustrated, telling him there is no point talking, and Lee begins forming magical movements, hoping he can activate the clock and return himself and the others, but what he does angers the monster and makes it attack him viciously, and during the battle a strange mark appears on Lee's neck, and the same mark appears on Xia's forehead, and Xia suddenly understands what it means. She realizes that if she merges her energy with Lee, they will create an overwhelming power, so she steps beside him and together they release a massive force that rushes toward the monster and restrains it completely. Meanwhile, we return to Tian, who is still standing in front of the clock, blocking Leon from entering, and suddenly the light coming from the clock disappears, making Tian panic because he knows his turn might be next. At the same time, Lee speaks to the monster and tells him he is about to give him a great service, then places his finger on the monster's head, showing him a vision where he returns to the moment the teacher was unconscious, and the monster sees himself apologizing to her and her accepting his apology, which gives him a deep feeling of peace, and suddenly he transforms into a small doll just like the other dolls he created, and Xia picks up the doll in shock and decides to keep it and places it beside the rest of the toys. Then we see Yue's brother talking to her after the monster turned into a doll, and he returns to his good, gentle nature, the same nature he had before meeting the monster, and he apologizes to his sister for everything he did, and they reconcile. At the same time, Xia speaks with Tian, who has stepped out of the clock, and she asks if he still wants to continue the journey with them, them, and he tells her he will stay because he felt the warmth of a family when he was with them and can't go back to living alone again. So Zia happily welcomes him to the team. The next day, Zia and her team prepare to leave the area to continue their journey, and she notices Tien is the most excited one, and she tells her team that a plague is spreading heavily these days, and she suspects a monster is behind the spread of the disease. When they reach the infected village, they split into small groups to gather information faster. Tien goes with Yang, Yue goes with Zhou, and Li goes with Xia. Then, something strange happens. As soon as Zhou walks away from the team, he tells Yue he wants to be alone and asks her to stay far from him. After that, Li returns to the rest of the team to update them, but suddenly smoke rises toward them and slowly moves closer to Yang, swallowing him completely. So Li screams Yang's name and jumps into the smoke trying to save him, unable to see anything because the smoke covers the whole place. Tien tries to rush inside too, but Yue stops him and tells him the situation is dangerous and it's better to stay back and observe what will happen, and Tien reluctantly agrees. After a moment, Yang appears yelling Li's name while a strange figure is dragging him, then suddenly the figure is slammed into the ground by Li. Meanwhile, Zhou is searching for Yang when he encounters a masked man who attacks him, and just when Zhou tries to counter the attack, something strange happens. He suddenly freezes, feeling dizzy, as everything around him turns black, and he collapses unconscious while the masked man drags him away. Zhou later wakes up unable to move, so he smears his blood on a nearby table so his friends can find clues and realize he is in danger. We return to Yang, who is shocked when Li wakes up and tells him he defeated the man who kidnapped him, and they regroup to check on Yang but notice Zhou is missing and hasn't returned since he went searching, so they begin looking for him and finally reach the place where he was taken, and Tien smells the blood Zhou left behind and confirms it's Zhou's blood, making the team panic as they realize he is in danger. Meanwhile, the masked man drags Zhou to a girl and hands her Zhou's sword, and she gets excited when she sees it because she wants to take it, but the sword shocks her with electricity, so she realizes the sword is special and only certain people can use it. She approaches Zhou to chain him, but he quickly jumps back, so she throws a small red bead at him which explodes into red smoke that makes Zhou dizzy, and as she approaches him, she reveals that she is a demon named Ran, and she plans to kill Li, and Zhou laughs at her, telling her that no one can kill Li except him, so she says she kidnapped Zhou for that very reason and demands he help her kill Li. But he refuses, saying when he decides to kill Li, he will do it himself. The demon becomes furious, saying no one has ever said no to her, then stabs him lightly in the shoulder as a warning, and tells him that if he won't help her willingly, she will force him, and her eyes suddenly change color as she uses her power to control his mind, making Zhou stare at her blankly like a robot and say he agrees to help her. Meanwhile, Zia continues searching for Zhou and walks through illusions, until suddenly what appears to be a corpse grabs Yang's leg, making him scream in terror, but Li moves his hand and says, "Get up, you fool!" revealing it was just an illusion, and he explains there are no corpses here and everything they saw was hallucinations caused by a magical bell hanging above them. As Zia points at the bell, it falls, and they continue onward. Ran senses the bell fall, and we learn she is the one who placed it there. After Zia and her group leave, someone appears and picks up the bell. Ran lights magical incense and approaches Zhou, who has regained consciousness, and she tells him his friends are getting closer, and Zhou confidently says he knows his friends will find him and save him. But Ran smirks and says she is already preparing a grand welcome for them. Meanwhile, Zia encounters a strange young man and asks if he saw Zhou, and the young man jokingly describes Zhou's appearance, saying he is about my height but not as handsome. And Yang tells Zia not to listen to him because Zhou is more handsome. And Li angrily shouts at Yang, asking if he wants to become shawarma, making Yang freeze in fear. The young man tells them he hasn't seen Zhou, so they decide to rely on themselves and search until they finally discover an old stone chamber covered in historical carvings, and Zia happily spots Zhou and runs toward him. But Li holds her back and stares at Zhou suspiciously, noticing Zhou's sword glowing strangely. Zhou's expression turns dark as he approaches Li, and a fierce, destructive battle breaks out. Li is stronger at first, but suddenly Zhou unleashes all his power and defeats Li with a massive attack that knocks Zia to the ground. At that moment, Ran appears and tells Li she's sorry, but she must kill him to regain her freedom. And Li asks what his death has to do with her freedom, but she refuses to explain and orders Zhou to finish him. Zhou approaches Li, but suddenly Li grabs Zhou's hand and stands up, looking at Ran with a victorious look and revealing that when he got close to Zhou during the fight, he used his power to break the mind control and restore Zhou's consciousness. Ran panics and tries to escape, but Zhou attacks her, and suddenly her loyal assistant appears and grabs her, quickly teleporting them both away. Tien sees Ran being carried and tells Yang what he witnessed, and Yang, being a doctor, feels responsible for helping anyone injured, so he follows them and discovers that the young man they asked earlier about Zhou is actually Ran's assistant. Yang senses something strange about Ran, but still decides to help her, and he becomes shocked when Ran confesses she was the one who spread the plague in the city. Yang asks why she did it, and Ran says she was once treated as special, and people believed she was blessed until she got the idea to release the plague, thinking she could then stop stop it and gain even more respect, but everything backfired and she couldn't control the disease, and people began hating her and treating her horribly, and things became so bad they even tried to bury her alive. So she locked herself inside her house and made everyone believe she died, relying only on her assistant for everything from that day. Yang listens quietly and treats her wound, and Lee arrives and sees Ron's condition, angrily asking her assistant why he didn't protect her properly. But the assistant begs Lee to save her and uses his own healing energy, revealing he is also a monster who escaped the monster world and lived among humans for years. And Ran was the first person he ever met in the human world, and from that day he stayed by her side. He then pulls a glowing orb from his body and tells Lee it is a cure used to treat diseases and that Ran wanted to kill him because his body contains an orb similar to this one. And he asks Lee to use the orb to end the plague. And before anyone can speak, he sacrifices himself and disappears. Ran wakes up and is devastated when she learns her assistant destroyed himself just to give her another chance at freedom. And Lee comforts her, saying they must honor the assistant's sacrifice, then uses his power to cleanse all the darkness in her heart, allowing her to live a normal life again far away from evil. Suddenly, Leon appears in pain, and they realize that as the evil in the world decreases, Leon's power weakens. And we discover Leon is the one who appeared in Rand's life and planted the idea of spreading the plague, twisting her into a villain. Rand tells Lee everything, and before they continue speaking, Tien arrives carrying Yue in his arms, saying she has been infected with the plague, and Rand feels guilty and apologizes deeply when she sees Yue's condition. And Zia panics, seeing Yue like this, praying she won't die. Yang tries to treat her and returns moments later holding a medicine bottle, saying the formula could be a powerful cure or a deadly poison, and someone must try it first to know which. So Lee grabs it and says he will drink it because he wouldn't die anyway. But the moment he drinks it, he starts coughing, making Joe panic and think he's dying. But Lee tells him not to worry because the medicine is simply very bitter, and Joe angrily says he wishes it had actually killed Lee just to spare them from his annoying jokes. While Yang celebrates because the medicine worked, and they quickly give it to Yue. After that, Ron walks away looking at her home for the last time and decides to live among people again, so her assistant's sacrifice won't go to waste. Later, Yang walks alone and sees a tree with drops of blood on it, and when he approaches, the tree suddenly trembles and its branch grabs his leg, turning his eyes completely black as he remembers the exact same thing happened the day his mother died. And suddenly, Joe arrives and snaps Yang out of it, asking what happened. So Yang tells him everything and explains that the same kind of tree killed his mother, but Joe is confused and tells him trees can't hurt anyone, and explains that when his father died, he was devastated and only felt safe when he leaned against a tree because it made him feel comforted. So Yang tries to convince himself that he must have imagined everything. That night, Sia gathers all her friends to celebrate their success after completing so many missions in a row, and celebrates Yang finding the cure for the plague and saving the entire village. And most importantly, everyone becomes happy for Yue's survival, and they keep singing and dancing together, with Tian and Yang being the most excited ones as they spend the whole night celebrating. And everything goes perfectly until Zia suddenly looks at Yue with suspicion and asks her if she is a spy working for the commander who exploits everyone. Yue freezes from Sia's unexpected question, and Zia tells them she received a message from an unknown person saying there is a spy among them who reports all their movements to the commander, and she says she won't accuse anyone unfairly. But once she finds the traitor, she will show no mercy, and she tries to close the topic. But Joe says he knows the traitor has a mark on his hand and suspects Yang. So he grabs Yang's hand to check but finds nothing, hurting Yang deeply because they doubted him, so he walks away sad, ending the beautiful night with a big problem. Later, Yang goes to sleep but suddenly feels someone standing behind the door, and the sound vanishes. This person was actually Joe, who wanted to apologize but feared Yang would refuse, so he left without saying anything. The next morning, everyone tries to treat Yang normally, and Tien calls him over to eat some chicken he stole, but Yang ignores him, gives Joe a disgusted look, and walks away. Lee tells Joe that since he ruined everything and falsely accused the boy, he must fix the situation immediately or Yang will leave the team, and if that happens, they will be in huge trouble because finding another doctor as skilled as Yang is nearly impossible. Joe understands and decides to apologize properly. Then they continue their journey until they reach an icy mountain where they meet a wise old man who speaks with Lee and asks him why he cannot feel the power stone even though half of it is inside his body, and the wise man reveals the other half of the stone is inside Zia, and Lee's half cannot activate until Zia's half awakens first. Lee is shocked because he never knew he was linked to Zia in this way. At that moment, Yue remembers when the commander told her she must report everything she learns about Zia, and we discover she truly has been a spy for the commander. Meanwhile, Joe takes some fruit to Yang, attempting to apologize, but Yang stays silent, leaving Joe embarrassed and walking away. At the same time, Lee talks to Sia, asking her to kill him after he finishes defeating all the monsters, and Sia becomes very sad, telling him she would never do that. But Lee insists, saying he has had enough of life and wants it to end, and asks her to take the part of the power stone inside him and merge it with the part inside her so her power becomes complete. But Zia says she no longer cares about completing her power. She only wants evil to disappear and monsters to return to their own world. Suddenly, Lee changes the topic and asks her about her relationship with Joe, and Zia tells him they've been friends since childhood and is confused why he's asking. Later, Tien is standing with Joe burning the castle gate when they notice a group of soldiers approaching, and their commander is masked, and suddenly the commander moves his hands, causing the soldiers' shapes to shift into terrifying forms. Tien screams they are not monsters nor normal humans, and before anyone reacts, the soldiers attack and a fierce battle starts. Tien is nearly killed until Joe saves him, telling him he was wrong earlier because these soldiers are indeed humans, but under a strong spell. Meanwhile, Jia lies unconscious and some monks perform rituals to increase her power. But suddenly Leon appears, speaking to Lee and revealing his plan to destroy the world and saying he won't rest until his mission is complete. We learn that Leon was once Lee's friend and was the one who brought him into the human world.